My name is Lorraine. I'm 71 years old. Mwesiuba makabanisege. I live alone in a simple house in Austin, Texas, and I've gotten used to the cold coffee, the low television, and the sound of the wind coming in through the cracks in the window. But there was one night, a single night, not that still wakes me up in the middle of the night. Tell me something. Have you ever tried to be accepted by being humble? Have you ever believed that? Just because you love a lot, people would accept you with respect? Well, that's what I did, and I was treated like a nuisance with a gift tie. Many people, when they see a lady with worn clothes and calm manners, think that she's just some old woman who doesn't know anything, who doesn't understand the looks or the words spoken with poison. But I always understood everything. I just pretended not to see, because sometimes the pain is more bearable when we pretend that it is not there. Today I'm going to tell you what happened at the dinner where I met my daughter-in-law's family. I went with an open heart, and I came back with him in pieces. But what they didn't know is that I kept everything. And now, you will understand why now. But before we dive into the heart of this story, I need you to know one thing. That night, I sat at the table with a smile on my face, and I was served with the quietest humiliation of my life. I took a walnut cake made with the hands that raised my son, and I was greeted as if I were an extra in a show of appearances. When everyone started laughing at a joke, one that only made sense to those who think they are better than others, I understood. It was not a welcome dinner. Welcome dinner. It was a portrait, and I was the poor frame they wanted to expose. But not now, my Aunt Sue. Not yet. I'll tell you everything calmly. I only ask one thing. If you also felt small in a place where you just wanted to be accepted, if you were silent so as not to cry in front of others, leave your like here and subscribe to the channel. It's not by number, Wishiam. No, it's because I need to know that I am not alone in this memory, that there are people on the other side who will understand me. This story hurts, but if you stay with me until the end, you will understand why she also saved me. I remember when Matthew was still little, with his feet cracked from running barefoot in the dirt yard, and the most curious look in the world. He asked me questions that I didn't always know how to answer. But even so, he looked at me as if I owned all the answers. We lived in a rented house in the countryside of Arkansas. Simple in name. Dinner attached to your zone. One room served as a bedroom and living room. The other was a kitchen and improvised bathroom. The refrigerator was old. It made a noise that woke me up at dawn. But I never let him lack food, even if it was a bread with margarine and a glass of powdered milk mixed in water. I worked my whole life in a hospital, first as a cleaning assistant. Then I learned to take care of people. I learned by force, cleaning vomit, malodorous, holding cold hands of those who left with no one around, reaping tears from a desperate family. Many times I left Matthew with neighbors. Other times I took it with me. Wow. Wrapped in a blanket on the reception bench. He grew up there, listening to the whistle of the machines and the sighs of the early mornings. He never complained. He never charged me for what I couldn't give. On his 6th birthday, one day, I made a cornmeal cake with the leftover flour from the church basket. I decorated it with sliced banana on top, and a little brown sugar to give it a party look. I invited the children of Mrs. Rosa, a neighbor across the street, and made a balloon out of a plastic bag tied with sewing thread. Matthew hugged me tight that day and said, "You're the best mom in the world." Lady hostages, and I believed it. Bigger man, I seriously believed. There was one time, when he passed a selection for a seminar in Dallas, that I found myself in a dead end. The registration fee was high for me. I sold my wedding ring, the only material reminder of his father. I didn't cry at the time. It wasn't till later, when I saw Matthew walking out the door with a backpack on his back and a twinkle in his eye. I knew that step could change his life, and I changed mine too. I was alone for a few months, with an empty chest, but with the certainty that I was doing the right thing. We have always been very united. At the end of the year, parties. Even when I didn't have a gift, he helped me decorate the room with crepe paper and wrote a letter of gratitude. "Mom, thank you for everything. I'll take care of you when I grow up." He wrote it in crooked handwriting, but full of love. I kept them all. I still have one inside my Bible, Leo. So, when he met Charlotte and told me he was in love, my heart was filled with hope. I thought, now he's going to have the family I never had. She seemed polite, spoke beautifully, came from a structured family with a big house with, Dodi, vacations in Orlando, a plentiful table at Christmas. I thought that was what he deserved. That all that effort, all that life counted in cents, was now going to turn into a lighter future for him, and for me too. Who knows? Deep down, I dreamed of a seat at the table, not for the food, but for recognition. But mind you, a mother's heart has these things we idealize. He thinks that everyone will love our son as we do, that they will see how special he is, how much it costs to get him there. I, in my own way, thought that Charlotte and her family would receive me with respect, that they would understand the woman behind the child. But this, well, that's another story. Sometimes I find myself remembering these scenes as if they were photographs. The old sofa with a patched cover, the pan crackling on the stove, the smell of brewed coffee and stale bread in the oven. We didn't have luxury, but we had truth. And Matthew's look, before everything changed, was my most beautiful portrait. Allow me to ask you a question now. Have you ever felt like you gave your all for someone, and then been forgotten by the wayside, as if it never mattered? I wish that, if this memory also lives in your chest, you would leave here in the comments a simple sentence, just so I know that you understand me. It can be an "I believe," a "I've lived it," or even a "touched me." Because this story is not just mine. It belongs to many of us. And the hardest thing is that, at that time, I still didn't know what was coming. I believed that the love I gave would be enough to keep me standing. But soon I would find out that love is not always enough when the pride of others decides to erase you. And it all started with a look that seemed sweet, but it hid the beginning of my erasure. The first time I saw Charlotte up close was in a cafe near Matthew's house, right there in Austin. Ah, it was a beautiful place, with brick walls and waiters who spoke softly, as if everything there had to be cleaned, contained, without exaggeration. I was all dressed up in my favorite flowered blouse, the one I bought on sale at Ross, and that made me feel beautiful. Matthew introduced me with a smile. That's my mom, Lorraine. Ah. Charlotte reached out, smiled slightly, but didn't look me in the eye. It was quick, but I noticed. You know that tightness in the chest that we feel when instinct screams, but reason tries to calm down. I thought, maybe she's just shy. We want to believe that, right? That no one will look crossly at a mother who only loved too much. But it was there that I began to feel that something was out of place. Over coffee, she praised everything Matthew said, laughed easily at his stories, touched his arm as if marking territory. But when I tried to join the conversation, she would change the subject or just smile without answering me. I talked about the weather, the church, the vegetable garden I was planting in the backyard. She used to use her cell phone. At one point, he commented matter-of-factly, "Well, in my family, everyone had access to refined education. Well, my mother went to Connecticut. My father went to Stanford. I grew up with classic books at home and family dinners where we discussed politics and literature." He said this looking at me, now, with a sweet tone of voice. But the look, the look, he said something else. It was as if to say, "You don't belong in that kind of world." I smiled. Not because I agree, but because I learned early on that a woman who imposes herself too much with her mouth often loses with the heart. I swallowed hard and continued to listen. I left that cafe with an uncomfortable doubt in my chest. I didn't say anything to Matthew. Of course, I didn't want to be the mother who gets in the way, who points out defects where maybe there is only difference. But my mother's heart, the one that never fails, was already warning me. And he warned me again a few weeks later when we met on Matthew's birthday. Charlotte prepared a dinner just for the three of us. She cooked well. I can't deny it. But she treated me as a visit of favor. He offered water before I asked, but he didn't ask if I wanted more. He showed the decoration of the house, but never invited me to give an opinion. When I mentioned a memory of Matthew's childhood, "Wow, to guide," she cut in with a smile. Yandish. It's beautiful to see how he's evolved, right? Even with such a strong origin. Different, not. I kept quiet. At the time, I pretended I didn't understand. But inside, something was already starting to really hurt. That girl didn't see me as a mother. I saw myself as the past, like a detail that would be better if it was erased. But what she didn't know, it's just that the past, when you decide to wake up, can become the strongest present in the room. And at that time, I still had no idea what was coming, because the worst was still stored in a dinner that would change everything. Have you ever felt like you were being measured without knowing who you really are? Well, prepare your heart, because the invitation to that dinner was yet to come, and with him, the wound that would mark my soul forever. Let it you see. After that anniversary, things began to take a shape that only those who have been pushed to the margins can recognize. I noticed the details, and it wasn't because I'm too sensitive. It was because I'm old enough to understand what's not said. The exclusions did not come loudly. They came in silence. For example, he had dinner at Charlotte's parents' house with the couple's friends. Matthew commented over it, saying that it was going to be another one of those meetings with people from her company, and that it wasn't really my kind of environment. He did not insist. He didn't even invite me. Then I saw photos on social media. Everyone there. Charlotte smiling. No. Her parents toasting. Matthew in the center of the table. Only I didn't show up. Not even in the background. I didn't not even in mention. It was as if I didn't exist. At their engagement, they had a beautiful party in a rented hall in Westlake. They told me it would be something intimate. Only the closest ones. I went with a pink dress that I wore to my neighbor's cousin's wedding. Well cared for. Nuance. Washed by hand. When I arrived, I realized that intimate meant more than 50 people. They put me at a table in the corner, and I so home, along with two uncles away from Matthew's side, who didn't even know my name. They took dozens of photos with Charlotte and her parents, and in none of them did I appear. Not by accident. When I asked why I wasn't tagged on social media, Charlotte laughed and said, Oh, Lorraine, we couldn't tag everyone, and you don't even use that much. Right. Those words came like petals, but cut like a razor. At Christmas, the first time we spent together after the engagement, I bought Matthew a wool scarf sewn by me and a set of bamboo spoons for Charlotte. I remember it well, because I saw that she liked to cook. I delivered it with affection, with the wrapping made with fabric ribbon. When I opened my gift, it was a scented supermarket candle, with the label still taped underneath. Wow, $5. Not even a ticket. I looked into her eyes at that moment and saw indifference. I saw that, for her, I was not a mother-in-law. I was the uncomfortable reminder of where Matthew came from. And perhaps what she wanted most, deep down, was to erase this origin from his story. In a loose conversation, I heard her mother say, that is a miracle, right? Getting where you are, even with so many limitations of origin. That's the real merit. And he laughed, as if talking about a stray dog who managed to get into an elite show. Charlotte didn't fix it. Neither did Matthew. How? They just changed the subject. And I kept smiling. On the outside, inside, my heart bled silently, because you know how it is. Mother can handle everything. We keep quiet so as not to create discomfort, not to hurt our children, not to look bitter. And I kept silent, but he recorded everything, every phrase, every look, every gesture that pushed me out. They didn't know it, but they were talking to a woman who had learned to survive in silence. And the worst of all is that I still tried to justify myself. I thought, maybe they're right. Maybe I'm really too simple for this world of theirs. That's it. This is the cruelest of all rejection. When it makes you doubt your own worth. But we don't stay in this place forever. 1 hour. Something happens. Something that breaks the curtain of fantasy once and for all. And, in my case, it was an invitation. An invitation that seemed innocent. A dinner. A chance for rapprochement. But that proved to be the stage of my greatest humiliation. And when he arrived, I already knew, deep down, that it was not just any invitation. It was an elegant trap, and I went into it with an open heart. You think you know who your family is, until sitting at the wrong table. The invitation came as if throwing a white towel in the middle of a silent war. Charlotte called me on a Thursday morning. Her voice, as always, was sweet on the outside and cold on the inside. Hi, Lorraine. We're going to have dinner at my parents' house next week. It would be nice for you to come. Get to know the family better. I froze for a moment. That sounded almost like a request for peace. And my heart, silly as every mother's heart, accepted it right away. Of course, honey, it's going to be a pleasure. And I hung up with trembling hands. I spent the rest of the day thinking about what to wear. My wardrobe was not very varied. I had mass, supermarket, and stay-at-home clothes. None of them seemed appropriate to me for a dinner at the home of people who studied in Connecticut and eat with fish cutlery. On Saturday, I went to Goodwill in the South neighborhood, the one near the laundromat. I rummaged through coat rack by hanger until I found a navy blue knitted cardigan with gold buttons and thick fabric. It was simple, but elegant, and most importantly, warm. It made me feel a little safer. On the eve of dinner, I decided to make a walnut cake. The recipe was from my grandmother, Eulalia, which I learned as a teenager, in a kitchen with a wood stove and jammed windows, whenever I wanted to please someone. It was this cake that I took. I prepared everything with the greatest care. I measured each spoonful, sifted the flour twice, beat the egg whites by hand. Moisu, how, as in the old days. It smelled good, wow, golden, neon, with that air of home that you can't buy. I wrapped it in a cloth embroidered with flowers and tied it with a satin ribbon. When it was time to leave, I took a deep breath. I looked in the mirror and saw a simple but firm woman, white hair tied in a low bun, fake pearl earrings, and a look that carried the weight of a lifetime. And yet, He sought kindness. I grabbed my bag, though the cake, and called Uber noon. On the way down, the driver tried to start a conversation. Nothing more. What do you know? But I just looked out the window. The streets of Austin passed slowly, and my chest tightened. Something told me that that night would be decisive, but we always hope to be wrong, right? I arrived at a large house with a lighted garden and a decorated iron gate. I rang the doorbell and was greeted by Nancy, Charlotte's mother. What do you move up, please? A lady with blonde hair neat in the salon, dressed in beige silk, and a smile that did not reach her eyes. Oh, you must be Matthew's mother. Come in, honey. I entered. No, I seated so down, offering the cake with both hands. I did it with great affection. Ah, it's nuts. Family recipe. She picked it up as if holding something fragile, but landed on the kitchen counter as if it were an uncomfortable weight. Oh, how cute. Then we'll see that. The house was beautiful. Persian rugs, huge landscape paintings, a glass sculpture in the center of the room. Charlotte and Matthew were already there. It's so kind so treasure. Glasses in hand, while they she gave me a kiss on the cheek and said, I'm so glad you came. And how? But there was a glint in her eye, an almost arrogant satisfaction. I sat in the living room, where Bob, the father, Lane, in can't see him, was talking to another couple who didn't greet me properly. The conversation revolved around investments, trips to Tuscany, renovation of the lake house. Wow. I listened and smiled. Without having much to say. At dinner time, we sat down at the table. Men on. You yonder. White tablecloth. Now. Candles. Porcelain tableware. My name was written on a little card. They put me between Charlotte and a family friend who didn't even speak to me. I made an effort to seem at ease, complimenting the food, asking about the sauce, trying to start a conversation, but the mood was clear. I was the displaced piece, the guest by obligation. Well, living proof that Matthew was a miracle. Even so, inside me, there was still a thread of hope, a stubborn part that believed that dinner was a gesture of approach. That knew, perhaps, a new phase would begin there, where I would be included with respect. We hold on to what we can, don't we? And am here, opening my heart, telling my story with all the open wounds. So, if you're listening there, leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. It's not just for me. It's for all the moms who have ever tried to fit into places where they just wanted to be loved back. I still have a lot to tell you, and all these truths hurt more than they seem. Because it was there, at that beautiful table, with such polite people, that I understood that not every invitation is made by welcoming. Some are made just to show you how much you don't belong. And the worst was yet to come, because between a glass of wine and a cruel comment, something was said, something that broke my heart into silence. Do you want to know what it was? So follow me near down, because the next sentence I heard, it never left my head. The table was set as in an old movie scene, white crockery with a gold rim, bowls that clinked with every movement, folded napkins with a silver ring in the center. The chandelier over our heads cast a warm, monoculum, yellowish light that left everything with that air of contained wealth, of luxury that wants to appear modest, but does not hide what it is. The smell of roast meat mixed with wine invaded the air, and each dish came with a French name. I barely understood what I was eating, but I praised it anyway, trying to keep my smile firm. The conversations revolved between trips to Europe, investments in funds I didn't even know existed, and comments about how the country is changing, and not always for the better. Ah, said by Bob, "Kaya buon sala, sinat tanai, what is clear agiba," with that tone of someone who thinks he knows everything because he has read half a dozen expensive columns. I kept silent. She tried not to look out of place. I adjusted the blue jacket that was starting to get warmer than it should, and ran on my eyes over the table, looking for something that would make me feel a part. My cake, for example, I had left it on the kitchen counter, still wrapped in the embroidered cloth my mother wore to Christmas dinners. I waited for the right moment and said, "I brought a dessert. It's a walnut cake that my grandmother taught me how to make." Nancy looked over her shoulder, smiled with her lips, and said, "No." Oh, how cute. Do you still make these homemade little things? The phrase was released in the air as if it were a compliment. But when she finished, everyone at the table laughed. Not a laugh, no. It was that contained, muffled, elegant laughter, which hurts more than any scream. I stopped chewing. I swallowed. I felt the meatloaf coming down in one piece, without taste, without the courage to go back. Matthew said nothing. What? He kept cutting the food as if he hadn't heard. Charlotte looked at him and smiled. And I smiled too, but my smile was different. It was the one we learned to give when we realized that we are alone in a place full of people. The night went on with more wine, more conversation, more exclusion disguised as kindness. When I was asked something, it was always about what it was like growing up in Arkansas, or what it was like raising a child alone without much structure. Always like this, as if my greatest achievement had been to survive what they considered tragedy, and my biggest flaw, to have left marks of this on their son. Wow. When they finally served dessert, it was a passion fruit mousse made by a French confectionery in the city. My cake was there, and hell und gebotend, on the embroidered cloth. Wine octane, forgotten in a corner of the kitchen. How? No one touched it. No one asked. On the way out, Nancy thanked me with a kiss on the cheek and said, "It was great to have you here, Lorraine. Monat de Lyon. These exchanges are so enriching. Right. I agreed. And at that moment, I realized that it had just been shown, not presented. One, wow, displayed. Wow, as if showing a curious relic, a vestige of a past that they wanted to romanticize, but not to mix. In the car back, I stared at the cloth of my cake on my lap. It was still warm, hot, as the shame that slowly rose in my chest. I wanted to cry, but I didn't. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. No, I still, I'd kill by it. I just looked out the dark window and wondered, did Matthew see it? Did he notice what they did to me at that table? Or is it, even worse? Did he leave because he agreed? This question would accompany me for many nights. But in that one, in particular, something inside me started to break. Because it wasn't just a dinner. It was the portrait of where I would never be accepted. And what happened the next day? It just confirmed everything. Want to know what it was? So don't let go of me now. Because what came next? It made me doubt even the love I thought was forever. I should have left right after that. The ignored cake. The muffled laughter. Wow. The sweet words full of thorns. But I stayed. I stayed because a part of me still insisted on believing that it was just discomfort, not disrespect, that it was all new to them too, and that, over time, I don't know, maybe they could see it. Foolishness? No. Mother has this gift of insisting until she gets completely hurt. And that night, I got hurt. No shouting, and no scandal. No. It was a fine, cutting pain that crossed me in a way that never left. The conversation continued, and between one glass and another, Bob began to talk about meritocracy, those ready-made speeches, of how people need to try harder, of how not everything's the fault of the system. And then he looked at Matthew with that smile of people who were pleased with themselves and said, "So, now, and he's so confident. Nat, this is really an exception, because, let's face it, coming from where it came from, no one would have imagined that he would get where he did. It's admirable. And then he raised the glass, as if making a toast. Charlotte smiled widely, with a proud twinkle in her eyes. The guests shook their heads, as if approving the effort of a boy who has overcome the weight of being born in the wrong place. I stayed there, quiet. The fork in his hand stopped in midair. His chest froze. The words escaped me. I looked at Matthew. I looked at it with everything, with the eyes of someone who was waiting for a gesture, a word. Wait. Dad. One sentence. A discomfort. Mom. Anything. But he lowered his head. He pretended he was looking at the plate. He said nothing. Nothing. I saw my boy walk away from me that second. Not because he chose another path, but because he chose not to defend me. It was at that moment that I understood. I wasn't invited to that dinner because of love. I was taken there as a showcase, as a background piece, as living proof that Matthew won, even with the past he carried. And do you know what hurt the most? It was realizing that my son, Tao, it didn't just allow it. He needed it. I needed to be seen as small and as childish so that he would look bigger, as if everything I was, a nurse at dawn, a mother without rest, a woman without luxury but full of faith, was just a chapter that needed to be overcome. Forgetful, embarrassed, and now worn too. At that luxury table, with expensive glasses and suppressed laughter, I felt something I had never felt before with my son. Shame, not by me, but for him, because a son who forgets who raised him with love, well, it loses more than its history. He loses himself. And I know there are a lot of people listening to me right now, maybe even seeing themselves in me, thinking, how can a mother be treated like that by someone she's given everything to? And that's why I ask you, it doesn't get out of there. Because what comes after that, it's what really changes everything. This is when pain becomes strength, and absence becomes a response. There's a part of this story that I have not yet told, a part that no one imagines. Always sitting so stubborn, but that you need to hear. That night, when I got home and took off my coat, I looked in the mirror and didn't see the happy mother anymore. I saw the woman erased, the invisible woman, when Aunt Tawam. And it was there that something began to change inside me. It was there that silence began to take another form. And can you imagine what happens when a woman like me, do you decide to stop lowering your head? Because that's exactly what started to happen. And the first step, he disappeared. The Uber driver opened the door for me and asked, "Are you okay?" I just shook my head. I walked in slowly and adjusted the hem of my dress and held the cake in my lap as if it were a newborn baby. No one touched him. Nobody even wanted to know. The satin ribbon was still there, a little loose, and the cloth embroidered with my mother's little flowers now looked like a misplaced memory. The car left, and the city passed by the window like a movie that is no longer funny. The highlights, the mansions, the fancy restaurants still full, while inside me everything was empty. It was as if I had left my heart on that table, but no one had noticed. I adjusted the cake, as if that would protect me from something, and I stood there, in silence. The driver put on instrumental music, one of those that play in a dentist's office, and, for an instant, the sound of the engine was the only one that kept me company. I thought about the clothes I washed in the tank until the skin on my hand cracked. In the soups I improvised with what I had just to keep Matthew from going to sleep hungry. On nights when he coughed nonstop, and I sat next to his bed, with a wet towel on his forehead and praying softly for the fever to subside. I remembered the times I slept, sitting in a hospital chair, with my feet swollen and my uniform sticking to my body, just so I wouldn't leave him alone when he had pneumonia. And now he was sitting at a table where no one respected me. And he didn't say a word, not a gesture, not a glance, only silence. And sometimes Silence weighs more than any scream. It is in this kind of silence that we hear everything that has never been said. No, pain. It has a pain that is like a crack in the glass. At first, it seems small, but when you look again, she's already taken over everything. That's what I felt on that way home. A crack taking over me. Because it wasn't just about dinner. It was about everything. It was about a lifetime of trying to do it right, believing that love was enough, and that being a mother was loving, sacrificing, forgiving. How? But in that car, with the cake forgotten on my lap and my chest hurting without crying, I began to wonder, what about when love doesn't come back? And when love turns you into a shadow? If you've ever felt that, if you've ever loved someone so much that you completely erase yourself, and yet you've been forgotten, comment here on this video. Write only it. I know how it is. I understand you. It's true. Because I need to know that this pain is not only mine, that someone on the other side has also felt this invisible cut, this nameless absence, this silence that screams. When I got home, I went in slowly. The sound of the key in the lock sounded louder than ever. I placed the cake on the table, still packed, hidden down. On I'd seen the master still warm. Then the I sent out of a town, and I sat down. No, I didn't turn on the light. I just stood there, Mahran, staring into the dark. The clock ticked and seemed to mock me, because every second reminded me, you gave everything, and now, wait, she is here, alone, in dark. But in that pitch black, something began to form, a strange feeling. It wasn't anger. It was not sadness. It was a different silence, a silence that begins to take shape as a decisions start. Because as much as I loved Matthew, as much as he was my whole life, I understood there, in that unlit room, that continuing to offer myself to those who don't want to see me. It was the same as abandoning myself. And can you believe that the next day, he didn't even call me? That's that. But when he called, you can go sit there, not sit down. Then, yes, that's when everything started to change. And you won't believe what he told me. It took me 3 days to pick up the phone. 3. Because in the first one, I was still trying not to feel it. In the second, I was trying to forget. On those, and on the third, I realized that it was no use. It had broken me inside. And when a mother breaks inside, she needs to at least hear her son's voice, just to remind you why you endured so much. So, I had seized you on. I took a deep breath, dialed Matthew's number, would you not stop to stay safe down, and waited. Wow. He answered the third call. Oh, hi. Mom, Miam. The voice dries, without pause, as if it were already in a hurry before even listening. Oh, hi. My son. How are you? I say in a sweeter tone than I felt. He replied, with the everything Yes, and was silent. I continued, Well, Tom, I kept thinking about you these days. I wanted to know if everything went well after dinner. He replied, Well, now what can each do? And so happy to come. Yes, it was all great. And the silence returned. I swear I waited for a question. Hey, and you, Mom? Oh, Kayin, how did he Tanashi? Did you arrive well? And the man, Tosenka, Demsir, I'll share your such anything, but it didn't come. Oh, then I asked the question that gnawed at me. Matthew, wow, did you realize what happened at that dinner? On the other end of the line, Nana, case your culture. He let out a sigh. Those sighs that come before a rehearsed speech. And he said, Mom, Mother, no. You need to understand that. They are different people. It's another world. Me. They don't mean it badly. It wasn't personal. Or any whatever. At that time, I felt as if I was slowly falling into a bottomless pit. It wasn't personal. As if I hadn't been ridiculed. As if the cake, the silence, Charlotte's poisoned laughter, and it had talked to walk on. Nothing had cut me inside. They are different people. As if that justified treating me like a nuisance. As if my worth depends on the type of wine I know, or the school I attended. I took a deep breath and tried to answer calmly. My subconscious watch too. Oh, well, I said to Son, how would be you? I didn't want to cause trouble. No, I just wanted to know if you saw how I was treated. And he replied, you're toned. Mom, Anya, sometimes you feel too much. You cling to things. They just have a different way of looking at life. That's when I understood. It wasn't Charlotte. It wasn't Nancy. Wow. It wasn't Bob. It wasn't the crystal bowls or the marble table. It was him, my boy, Sim, the one I carried with a fever in my lap, who I defended from a gossipy neighbor, who I put in front of me in everything. He, now, that fellow, had chosen another side. And the worst, he had chosen to think that I exaggerated, that I imagined pain where there were only differences. I said goodbye with a okay. Son, I just wanted to know if you were okay. And I hung up with a shaking hand. But this time, it wasn't sadness. It was a kind of awakening. Because there's a time in our lives that even the deepest love needs to be reevaluated. And I'm not talking about stopping loving. No, no. I'm talking about understanding that loving also has a limit. And I was being crossed every day. I sat back on the couch and stared at the wall, where there was still a picture frame with a picture of us, me and him, at a picnic in Zilker Park, when he was still a teenager. He was eating a sandwich that I prepared and laughing with his mouth full. That boy over there. It wasn't the man who hung up the phone like I was an embarrassing reminder. What? That boy. She was proud of her mother who prepared the snack, even without money for soda. And do you know, at that moment, I made myself a promise. Silent, nan, top on the sea, but firm. I was going to stop offering myself to a love that no longer saw me as a priority. I was going to stop shrinking to fit into their world. And for the first time in a long time, I started thinking about myself. I started to remember Lorraine as a woman, not just a mother, not only support, but people and woman. Oh, and after Sarah power, when she wakes up, changes everything. Have you ever felt that? That moment when you realize you've spent your life giving everything and received crumbs. That she was kind, waiting for affection, but only received silence? If you've felt it, comment here. Well, right, and I agree. Or it's true, because this pain of being forgotten, only those who have carried someone on their backs and seen that someone turn their face can understand. But life, my people, has a curious way of responding, because when we start to move away, even without noise, those who thought they had us in the palm of their hand are starting to feel it. And that's what happened. Why? And you can't imagine how far he's come to try to make me come back. But then it was too late. Or is it? Because what he asked me later, it left me breathless. And I'll tell you, because this story, there's still unexpected return. Wow. After that call, I stopped trying. I didn't send any more messages. I didn't call anymore. I didn't hit the point of affection on a door that doesn't open. I left Matthew with the silence he chose. It wasn't punishment. It was a response. And perhaps, for the first time, I began to understand what it is to protect yourself without seeming harsh. I went back to my routine like someone returning home after a long war. Tired, nursed too, but alive. I started sewing more often. I refurbished some old clothes. I laughed with the neighbors of a Baptist church here on the back street. Dolores, Sister Regina. Oh, even Pastor Bill asked about me. I said my walnut cake was missed at the last meeting. Smile, wild. But I didn't explain, because we learn there are pains that only God hears. I started to attend the used book fair in the East Cesar Chavez neighborhood. For $1, he brought home old novels, letters exchanged between strangers, even a diary that someone left in the middle of a box. Reading the words of others, I began to organize mine. And then, without haste, without noise, I opened the closet where I kept the boxes of the past. There were 3. One made of cardboard, it's in Chipoland Ikecasts, with masking tape in the corners. One made of wood, with the smell of time. And another blue one, where the things I said I would never touch again were kept. I sat on the living room floor and started. The first thing I took out was a copy of Matthew's 4th grade report card, the one in which the teacher had written, "Matthew is hard-working and kind. He will go far." No. I read it and cried. No. Then came the overdue electricity bills that I hid from him. The receipts from the laundry where I worked, hidden at night for a while. The notes he left me in the fridge. "Mom, I love you. I made ramen noodles." A piece of paper with his handwriting as a small one said, "When I grow up, I'll give you a beautiful house. I kept it as if it were a contract, but that day I read it with different eyes. It wasn't just memories. They were proofs. Proof of everything I was, everything I did, everything I carried. Ah, and I realized one thing. I always hid my strength so as not to scare. I always thought that a mother's love was to annul herself, to be silent, to give herself entirely. But it is not. True love also needs to know how to stop. Love also has a limit. And I reached mine. It was then that I made a decision. Nothing scandalous, nothing angry, but firmly. I was going to put everything in order. My documents, my papers, my history, not for revenge, but for protection. Because if my son didn't see me anymore, the world was going to see it. And if he wanted to pretend, it came out of nowhere. I was going to make it clear where he came from, and with whom. I started to separate the photos, the letters, even the old emails with the scholarships I filled out for him. I set up folders. I classified dates. I did everything as if I were building a foundation, one of those that no one sees, but that supports everything. For the first time, I wasn't taking care of someone. I was taking care of myself. And if this piece of my life can become a mirror or a hug for someone, help me carry it forward. Like and subscribe here to the channel. Oh, it makes more difference than you think. Sometimes all a woman needs is someone to listen to what she went through, and from a corner of peace to say, well, I felt it too. Because now, now it was my turn to exist completely, to no longer ask for permission to be remembered. And it was in this silent process, between paper and nostalgia, that something happened, something I didn't expect. A message from Matthew. Short, cold, but with a request that, look, so far, I have a hard time believing it. Do you want to know what he wrote? So, stay with me, because what he asked of me, now, it will shock you as much as it shocked me. The cell phone vibrated slightly on the table while I organized some papers from the blue box. It was a message. When I saw his name, my heart made that automatic leap that only a mother understands. But soon after, that pause hit, because I knew, after so much silence, it didn't come out of nostalgia. Clicked, and there it was. Hi, Mom, could you lend me some money? Nothing much, just something temporary. I'll explain it to you later. Wow. The message is dry, down, direct, without a how are you, without a I missed you, just the request, only interest. I sat slowly, took a deep breath, and stared at nothing for a while. And it was there, in that room, full of memories and silence, that a guarded part of me began to move. Because there is something that you may not know yet. Something no one ever knew, not even Matthew. Before I met his father, Lee, when I was very young, I worked for a few years as a personal assistant to a lawyer in Montgomery, Alabama, a demanding but fair gentleman. I learned more from him than in any course. I wrote contracts, organized papers from powerful families. And there I saw up close how rich people protect their assets, and how the humble often lose everything because they don't know where to store value. It was at this time that I received a piece of land from my grandmother. Why, a small plot of land in the countryside of Ozark, Arkansas. Nothing that drew attention. But I registered it. I kept it in my name. And when I became a widow, I continued to pay the taxes of that land with what I earned in the hospital. Nobody knew, neither did Matthew. For him, I was just that simple woman who lived with little, and it was but by choice, because years later, an electric power company knocked on my door. They discovered gas in the region and wanted to buy the area. The value, $600,000. I accepted with one condition, was payment in cash. I did everything calmly, with the help of a consultant I met at church. I invested the money in CDBs, conservative funds. I diversified, and I never touched it, neither to change houses, nor to buy a new car. I continued, living on my salary, then on my retirement, because for me, security was not a luxury. It was quiet. And do you know why I never told Matthew that? Because I wanted to see who he would be without the money. I needed to know if the man I had raised with so much love carried within him the same value that I had carried throughout my life. And now, me sitting out tired, there he was, asking for money. Sitting on the sewer, but without asking me if I had, not knowing what was behind my rented house, the simple clothes, the handmade cakes. He thought he was asking someone poor. Little did he know that he was talking to a woman who could change his life, but that he was no longer sure if he deserved it. And that's when I tell you that you're still with me until now. It stays because what comes next is the point where everything turns, where the game changes, where a mother who has always been silent decides, for the first time, to show her strength, but not angry, with wisdom, because when life teaches us to wait, the answer comes at the right time. And what I did with that request, no one saw it coming. Neither did he. And maybe not even you. Want to know how I responded? So listen very well, because now the part that no one expected begins. I went to the grocery store that afternoon to buy some red apples and a can of condensed milk. I wanted to make my usual rice pudding, with cinnamon on top. The store is on the corner of my street, close by, and I like to walk when the sun starts to go down. The sky in Austin, at this time, has a golden light that looks like an old mother's embrace. I entered calmly. Small cart, there's and right there on the shelf of preserves, I heard two women talking. One of them gave me a nice good morning and started a conversation. He said he recognized me from somewhere. I, suspicious but polite, mild, "Hey, you must mistake me for someone else." She insisted, no, asked if I was related to Matthew, that boy who married Charlotte. from the Madsen family. I froze a little inside, but confirmed. In his mother. Ah, the woman gave a low giggle. Well, pounds, one of those that seemed to lock in the throat, and said, ah, oh, of course. So it was the lady who went to that dinner at Nancy's house. Right? They told me. They said that the lady went with a good outfit. Simple, Leon. Hyacinth count. Let's chair under the quay. Like a movie from the 50s. What a beautiful scene. Right? I took a deep breath. She continued, oh, excitedly. And don't you, Madame Talman, Nancy said it was exciting to see where Matt came from, that this enhances his curriculum, that shows overcoming. You know, growing up with difficulties, having a simple mother, and still managing to graduate. Mary Charlotte, enter that circle. Lance, write it down. And she stood there, fiddling with the cans of corn, as if she had told me something beautiful. But inside me, a warmth began to rise. It wasn't anger. No. It was a shame mixed with pain, as if they had put my life on an exhibition board. Without my permission, I smiled, guiltily. Again, how? The same smile I gave that night, holding the cake. I thanked him, paid for my things, and returned home with the apples weighing more than they should. Because at that time, I understood. I wasn't just ignored. I was used. I was transformed into a decorative element, a humble detail that enhances contrast. They put me in their history as a symbol of overcoming, but not to honor my journey. It was to inflate their ego. I was the old photograph, the before in the deluxe album of the after. That's it. It wounded me in a deep place. I sat on the couch again, with the bag on my lap, and stared at nothing. How do we get to this point? How does a son let his own mother become a showcase? Does it become pride for others, but never for her? There. That afternoon, everything inside me aligned. The laughter, the looks, the ignored cake, the message asking for money. And now, how? This? I was used as a test of someone else's effort, not as part of the victory, but as a step. That's it. I'm not going to allow that anymore. No, there are memories that stick to us like the smell of stored clothes. We can try to wash, hide, perfume, well, but they come back. They come back when you least expect it. And this scene, there, in the grocery store, was one of those. Now, I won't see her. He will live with me forever. What about you? Do you have any memories that never left your chest? A phrase you heard? A gesture that was stuck in time? Comment here for me. Tell me. He only says, I've lived it. Or it also marked me. Because sometimes sharing a pain is the only way to continue. And it was with all this boiling inside that I decided to write. I picked up a hardcover, navy blue notebook, which I got from a hidden friend in the church, and I started, page by page, I put everything in, not to cry, but to organize. Because when we write, pain finds a place. And when it finds a place, she stops hurting the same way. But just when I thought I had understood everything, the surprise came, and it was not small. A Charlotte, she came after me, and what she told me, you won't believe it. That night was quieter than usual. The moon shone through the cracks in the curtain. I dawned, and the wind passed softly through the open windows, bringing a smell of wet grass after the rain. I sat at the old desk in the living room, with a low lamp illuminating only the paper in front of me. I had decided to write to Matthew a long, detailed letter. Let now, as if it were my last conversation with him, even though I knew I might never deliver it. I started slowly, my hand shaking slightly, because each word carried decades of life, of choices, of sleepless nights taking care of him while the world slept. I wrote about what he didn't see, the shifts at the hospital, the simple dinners on the couch, the birthdays with flower cake that a neighbor lent me, the silent sacrifices, the pawned bills, and even the ring I sold to secure a seminar in Dallas that would change his life. All this I put on the page, carefully, without omitting anything. I talked about love that was never conditional, about how I raised him with freedom, even if it meant being invisible at times, so that he could grow up unaware of the money that could buy him. I described my sleepless nights, my tired body, my soul sometimes exhausted, but always full of faith that he would find his way. Every sentence I wrote brought a sense of relief and, at the same time, now, pain, because telling everything does not mean being heard. Telling everything does not mean that the other will understand, but I needed to put it on paper. I needed to feel that, finally, my voice was mine. One voice was mine. In the middle of the letter, I wrote about dinners with Charlotte and her parents, about how I was humiliated with silent laughter and looks of superiority, how that moment had shown me that the world is not always fair. It does not always understand effort, and how, as much as we love, sometimes love is not recognized. It was painful, yes, but writing it gave me a clarity that years of silence could not offer. He paused sometimes, looking at the ceiling, remembering every detail, the table, the cutlery, the smell of expensive wine, the cake that no one touched, and I took a deep breath, feeling the strength I had always carried, now more visible, even if only to me. I paused, because I knew I needed to write something I had never said, that I didn't hold grudges just for revenge, but for dignity. Who, despite the pain, regretted nothing, because every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every small victory on his path shaped the man he would become. And that, as much as he didn't understand it now, one day he would. And so I'd come, up in successor. And it was at that moment, looking at the words still wet with paint, that I felt the weight leave me. I felt that, even without delivering the letter, how I had already freed myself from some of the pain. I kept it carefully inside my Bible, between the pages of Psalms, that book that had always accompanied me, that knew my secrets and my tears. I knew that the letter would be safe there, and the silence that came along with it would be more powerful than any explanation I could give Matthew at that moment. Because silence sometimes says more than speech. Sometimes what we don't deliver, why, what we keep with respect and firmness, shows more strength than any direct confrontation. I leaned back in my chair, watching the moonlight reflect off the simple walls of my Austin apartment. For the first time in a long time, I felt peace. Not the peace of having resolved everything, not the peace of having been recognized, but the peace of finally having spoken, even if only to myself. It was a silent, oh, intimate, long, powerful act, and it was there, long, in that gesture, what I did unpond, that I realized that life gives opportunities to speak when we are ready, even if no one else listens. As I took a deep breath, closing my eyes, a thought crossed my mind. What would happen if Matthew found out all this now? If he read every word, every sacrifice, every night of fear and hope? But I didn't have to decide that now. The letter was written. How? My heart had already spoken. And at that moment, I understood that sometimes the greatest justice is to keep one's own truth to oneself, to allow oneself to feel, and to wait for time to bring the understanding that the moment denied. And suddenly, a premonition crossed my mind. Something told me that the next time I met Matthew, or someone close to him, the dynamic would change. That silence was not only a protection, but a preparation, and that when the truth came out, it would be powerful, not for shouting or confrontation, but for the dignity that each word had carried during all those years. Now, I ask you, who else has ever felt that they needed to speak out, but did not have the courage to deliver the whole truth? Who kept something precious just for themselves, waiting for the right moment? Comment below. Comment below. Tell me your memory, your secret, or something you kept as much as I kept this letter. Because sometimes sharing a memory gives us courage for the next steps. And it was in that silence that I realized I was ready. Ready for whatever came next. No. Because, as I kept that letter in the Bible, I knew that a turning point was about to happen. A twist that wouldn't just be about Matthew, or Charlotte, Sue, or her parents, but about me, about my strength, about what it means to be a mother, to be a woman, to be someone who has learned to wait and not to bow down to the arrogance of others. And then I asked myself, with my heart racing, are they ready to see the woman they've always underestimated? After many days of silence, deep reflection, and revisiting every memory that brought me pain and pride at the same time, I decided it was time to act, but to act in a way that no one could question. That didn't need long explanations or detailed justifications. I sat in my kitchen, with a mug of steaming coffee in my hand, and began to plan each step with the precision that life has taught me to have. The first change was silent, was almost imperceptible. I removed Matthew's name as a direct beneficiary from my bank account. Nothing was explosive, nothing was conspicuous, but it was symbolic. It was a silent warning that I was no longer willing to be underestimated or used. It was also a gesture of protection, because I realized that love does not need to be measured by money, and that not everyone values what really matters. The next day, I made an appointment with Martha, a lawyer I met at a small bookstore in Austin. While I was looking for an old book on inheritance law, Martha was black, had gentle eyes, and a firm posture that made me immediately feel that I could trust her. We talked at length about my intentions, about how I wanted to repurpose most of the inheritance so that it had a real purpose, that it would help people who really needed opportunities. I told her that I wanted to turn my quiet effort into something concrete, one that would allow girls and boys who, like Matthew, had endured hardship to grow up with dignity and hope, but without the weight of prejudice or arrogance from others. Martha listened carefully to each word, making precise notes and suggesting ways to legally protect each decision so that it was irrevocable and without room for misinterpretation. We chose a community institution in South Texas that offers scholarships to children of Latino single mothers, young people who struggle every day with economic and social hardship. It was exactly the kind of place I wish Matthew had known. A space of learning, respect, and opportunity. Where merit is recognized and effort is celebrated, not judged by origin. I felt enormous relief as I signed each document, knowing that my decision was helping to create futures that are worth more than any vanity or resentment. For the first time, I felt that my old sacrifices, the silence I had kept for so long, had transformed into something bigger than myself, and that, in a way, they finally justified every sleepless night, every difficult choice, every contained tear. There was no fanfare, no speeches or confrontations. I did everything silently, with the dignity that has always accompanied me. Each signature, once, each change was an affirmation of who I am, a woman who learned not to bow down to arrogance, not to depend on the validation of others, and to transform pain into constructive action. I knew Matthew didn't understand everything yet, and maybe never fully understood, but my decision wasn't for him. It was for me, for my own peace, to honor the life ID led and the effort ID put into every detail of our story. I was giving the world, me, not him, what could have made a difference. As I handed the finished documents to Martha, I felt a weight slip off my shoulders. It was not a weight of anger, nor of resentment, nay, but the weight of decades of silence and attempts to please and be accepted. Finally, I was in control of my own narrative, of the legacy I wanted to leave. The sensation was sweet, silent, but profoundly powerful. Every gesture I made, every step I took, was the embodiment of what I learned from life. That strength does not need to be displayed to exist. That dignity remains intact even when others try to diminish it. As I walked home on that hot Austin afternoon, with the wind blowing across my face, I realized I had done something definitive. I had cut what I needed to cut, and not out of anger, but out of quiet justice. Every decision I made was a reminder that I can protect my life, my son, and still turn the suffering of others into an opportunity for those who really need it. And for a moment, I imagined Charlotte and her parents somehow realizing that the woman they had judged and underestimated for years had not only resources, but also intelligence, strategy, and, above all, unshakable principles. But as that thought flashed through my mind, I felt a twinge of anticipation, because I knew they wouldn't notice right away that the revelation of what I had done, of how my choices now would shape the future, was yet to come. And when it came, it would be impactful. It would be a moment of quiet recognition, not out of gratitude, but out of the inevitable realization that the woman they tried to underestimate was always one step ahead. And it was at that moment, with my heart racing, that I began to plan the next move. I still needed to see how Matthew would react, how Charlotte would react, and how her parents would react when everything was exposed in a subtle but undeniable way. The feeling was that I was about to shine a light on the whole situation, a light that would clearly show who had character and who just flaunted wealth. And then I asked myself, walking through the quiet streets of the neighborhood, and with the dry leaves swirling in the wind, are they ready to see the woman they have always underestimated? Or do they still believe they can control their story with laughter and looks of contempt? Because the silent truth that I had prepared was about to reveal itself in a way that no one could ignore. It was a hot Tuesday in Austin, and I was sitting on the porch of my house with a glass of iced tea in hand, watching the dried leaves swirl in the wind. The morning had started quietly, like any other Moais Wadai, but I felt an uneasiness that I could not explain. Before he could comprehend what was happening, the doorbell rang insistently. It was Matthew, my son, with that look I knew so well, the mixture of despair, confusion, and guilt that he rarely showed to others. When I saw him standing in the doorway, feeling the tension emanating from him, I knew immediately that something had happened, something he couldn't handle on his own. He entered without much ceremony, almost tripping over his own feet, and sat down at my kitchen table, the same one that had seen so many simple meals, many burnt cakes, and countless nights of study. Matthew didn't say anything for a few seconds, just stared at my wrinkled hands holding the tea. Finally, in a trembling voice, he began to speak. Mother, Charlotte is pregnant. No. He stopped, took a deep breath, and I just kept silent, watching every gesture, every nervousness, every attempt of his to find some reaction from me. Then, with a caution that revealed fear, he continued, "Oh, and my parents, they started asking Ah, upon, you know, future financial support. They are wondering if there is something prepared when Tibetans want to top it. Mom, I felt the weight of the words like a knot in my chest, but there was no anger, no tears, just a serene calm that came from years of practice in dealing with crises, from a lifetime of surviving greater challenges than that. I looked at him, my voice low and firm, but full of meaning. Now, you want to know what I left? Or who did you cease to be? Silence fell on the kitchen like a heavy curtain. He didn't know how to answer. No, I could see the conflict in his eyes, the need for financial validation, and at the same time, the awareness that he had drifted away from me emotionally. Oh, what's to sell? It was the same son I had raised on my own, but now I was facing the consequences of choices he had made myself. While I remained calm, way up out the Tibetan, watching every reaction, every detail of that moment was charged with a silent, almost palpable tension that needed no words. Matthew began to stutter, me, looking for something to say, but I just kept going, with the calm of someone who knows exactly where he wants to go. You're desperate right now. But why? For money? Or for realizing what was lost along the way? He lowered his eyes, unable to articulate an answer. That simple question had struck something deep in him, the discomfort of realizing that he could not buy with money what he had lost through pride, the influence of his mother-in-law, and his own emotional short-sightedness. I sat closer, long, without touching, just sharing my gaze, my silence, the presence he had despised so many times. Matthew, nah, I said, oh, there are things that life teaches that not all money solves. Not all wealth buys the awareness of who we really are, nor does it correct the mistakes of the past. Charlotte and her parents can ask, beg, question, but I am not an option to fill gaps that should be filled with love and respect, not with figures and contracts. He took a deep breath, and I could feel the tension build up even more, as if all the air in the kitchen was heavy. His shoulders trembled slightly, his voice cracked, and for a moment I saw the boy who had cared for him as a child, the little one I cradled when I was sick, the boy who believed in me above all else. But now, this same man was being confronted with the truth he had tried to ignore, with the reality that the mother he had underestimated had built a life of strength and autonomy, quiet but unshakable. I didn't know. I didn't know how. Mom, I didn't think that you had done so much, that he had prepared himself like this, he whispered, and I just nodded. Wow, keeping the calm that had always accompanied me. It was not the time to reprimand. It was the time to show the power of silence, preparation, and patience. I was sitting there, watching his every expression, every doubt, every remorse that arose in his mind, and feeling the quiet justice that life afforded me. There was a moment when Matthew stood up abruptly, pacing back and forth, trying to sort out the thoughts that couldn't find a place. Mom, I just wanted. Oh, I do not know. I thought. But his words failed. Nah. And he fell silent. Now, because he realized that no argument could undo what was clear to him now. I was not willing to fill emotional gaps with money, nor with complacency. I looked at him and said, "Wow," with an almost motherly calm, but firm. "Mace, do you realize what it is like to miss the opportunity to have someone by your side who has always been ready to fight for you? Are you realizing that sometimes silence says more than 1,000 words, and that those who ignore the efforts of others end up alone with their own choices?" Matthew said nothing. He was stunned, not knowing how to react, with nowhere to turn. He had hoped to find his mother ready to give in, ready to succor, ready to be bought by his need. But he found a woman who knew exactly what she was worth and who was unwilling to be used. And at that moment, no, I realized that his despair was just the beginning of something bigger. He was beginning to understand, but he still didn't know how to deal with the strength I had hidden all these years. It was the beginning of a quiet moral breakdown, a moment when he confronted not only my decision, but the entire outlook on life that he had ignored. There are things that we live and keep, but maybe by telling, we help another heart to breathe. Enjoy this video and subscribe, and let's make this story reach those who need it. Matthew took a few steps towards the door, unable to look at me. Breathing irregularly, leaving stunned. It left a heavy silence in the air, and I just took a deep breath, feeling the intensity of the moment and the certainty that, finally, something was starting to move, something he couldn't control, something that would impact his every choice from then on. Well, as I closed the door, I stood for a few moments, letting the afternoon sunlight illuminate my face, and I felt a sense of quiet power, a confirmation that my decisions were shaping not only the present, but the future of everyone involved, with justice, dignity, and steadfastness. But even with that certainty, one question kept hammering in my mind. Would Matthew realize the depth of the lesson I was offering him? Or was it just another moment of shock that he would forget in time? Because the truth was out, and the next chapter of this story promised to reveal the real impact of the choices of all of us. That day in Austin started like any other, but there was a tension in the air that I had felt since the morning. I had made an appointment with Martha, my trusted lawyer, Mill, to finalize all the papers related to the will and the changes I had been planning for months. Every decision had been made carefully, quietly, without fanfare, because I had learned that true strength manifests itself in control and patience, not in immediate confrontation. I grabbed my simple coat, adjusted my worn leather bag, and stepped out onto the sunny street, feeling the soft Texas heat on my face. As I walked with measured steps to the office, when I arrived at the office building in downtown Austin, one of those tall glass buildings reflecting the sky, I noticed, through the window, Matthew and Charlotte exiting the parking lot together. They seemed normal, talking, down, but the tension in Matthew was visible. He always carried a mixture of pride and insecurity, especially when his wife was around. I held myself back from showing surprise or emotion. My every step was calculated, unobtrusive. Wow. He hadn't planned to meet the two, but the universe seemed to conspire to make this coincidence happen. When I got into the elevator, Matthew and Charlotte also got in, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Charlotte looked at me, her eyes narrowed. No. Her voice cutting. Are you here? I took a deep breath, keeping my composure, and replied calmly but firmly, I am. Life teaches us to keep silence, but it also teaches when to leave documents ready. The atmosphere inside the elevator became heavy. Matthew didn't say anything, just looked at me with that expression of someone who is finally starting to realize that there are things he doesn't control. Charlotte folded her arms, trying to maintain the pose of superiority, but I noticed the slight flicker in her gaze, an instant of surprise, perhaps even fear. The elevator went up a few floors, and I remained calm. Oh, that sentence came yesterday. Safe, watching every reaction. When the elevator reached the office floor, I stepped out first, with quiet, almost unassuming steps, but each movement carried the quiet strength I had cultivated for years. Matthew stood still, speechless, as if the world had changed in an instant. He finally saw, in that brief moment, who I really was. Not just a simple mother, not just the woman who sacrificed herself for him, but a force that knew how to preserve his dignity, plan his future, and execute justice without fanfare. As I walked through the halls of the office, feeling the cold floor under my feet, I thought about everything I had gone through to get here. Every sleepless night, every financial hardship, every silent sacrifice, every moment I chose to endure insult or contempt to protect Matthew. It was all culminating in that instant. I didn't need to say anything. Scream, confront, life, the law, and planning took care of it for me. But there was a strange, quiet satisfaction in seeing his expression, that mixture of shock, fear, and recognition, even without a word being spoken. He was unarmed, vulnerable. Vulnerable, faced with something he could not manipulate. And in that moment, I understood the magnitude of the power of silence combined with preparation. I could feel every detail of his reaction, etching into my memory, knowing that he would carry it with him, even if he didn't speak. As I sat in Martha's office to sign the final papers, my mind turned to all the times Matthew had seen me work hard, cook simple meals, save every penny without fanfare, without flaunting, without complaining. He grew up thinking that all of this was natural, because I never wanted him to depend on me financially or become someone driven by money. Now, he began to understand that every gesture of mine had a purpose, every silence had a value, and that behind the apparent simplicity there were years of planning, strength, and wisdom. In the middle of that process, I felt a wave of emotion run through my body. It was the silent recognition that I didn't have to fight with shouting or direct confrontations. Justice could be quiet, elegant, not noise. invisible to others, but devastating to those who underestimated the strength of a woman who knew exactly what she was worth. And at that moment, I thought, Lou, if you're out there watching me, maybe you still have hidden forces inside you that can completely change the perception that others have of you. Without having to raise your voice, Matthew was still outside, way in the hallway, his cell, and I could hear his suppressed breathing. He leaned against the wall, trying to catch his emotional breath that he didn't know he had to face. Charlotte stood beside him. Wow, no unanswered his board to trying to keep her composure, but not fully understanding the impact of it. They had underestimated a simple woman, thinking that appearance and silence were signs of fragility. But that afternoon, in the hallway of a building in downtown Austin, they discovered the opposite. My life, my planning, my strength, and my ability to execute justice ruthlessly and silently. When I finished signing the documents, I took a deep breath, putting the pen and papers in my briefcase. Each signature was more than a bureaucratic act. It was a declaration of independence, strength, and justice. I didn't need to confront them verbally. I didn't need to explain anything. The simple fact of being there, making my decisions, signing my own story, was the most powerful message they could receive. Matthew finally got out of the elevator, and in that instant, I realized that he really saw who I was. Surprise, frustration, and recognition mingled in his eyes. He had hoped to find the mother who would give in, the woman who would bow to pressure from Charlotte and her family. But he found a woman who knew exactly what she was worth and who would not allow herself to be emotionally manipulated. The corridor was silent for a few seconds, each absorbing the impact of the encounter. I just watched him, feeling the tension ease slightly, but knowing that real understanding would take days, maybe weeks, to fully settle down. I walked out of the building calmly, breathing in the warm Austin air, feeling the breeze that brought with it the certainty that something had changed forever. And as I walked back to my house, I couldn't help but think. Matthew now knew that he had underestimated my strength, and that any future attempt at manipulation or contempt would meet with insurmountable barriers. But what would he do with this knowledge? How would I react to the revelation of who I really was, and that everything I had built depended not on approval, but on determination and quiet planning? The answer was about to unfold, and the next chapter promised to be the final proof that silent justice is often the most impactful of all. I received Matthew's message on a warm Friday afternoon while making tea in my simple kitchen in Austin. The sunlight poured through the curtains, illuminating the worn floor, the antique furniture, and for a moment I felt the peace of my routine intact. But his name flashing on the cell phone screen brought a mixture of anxiety and expectation. When I opened the message, my heart sank. He was crying, short, confused words, asking to talk, begging me to reconsider some decisions about the inheritance. Charlotte, no? I thought, immediately, had sifted through everything, records, documents, every paper ID left in order, And now, they'd discovered that my decision wasn't just a formality, but an act of quiet sovereignty. I took a deep breath, resting my hands on the sink, feeling the warmth of the teapot's porcelain. I remembered each night when I planned everything meticulously, not for revenge, but for protection. Every signature, every decision, every detail had been thought out so that Matthew would understand, or at least that he would realize someday, that life was not measured by the money we inherit, but by the character we build, and how. And now, finally, the records were before them, the truth crystal clear, but the chance to change what had happened lost. As I read the message, my body stiffened. Now, Matthew said he wanted to fix everything, that he didn't know how he had allowed it to happen that way. But I knew the truth. What he wanted now was not emotional reparation. It was not to understand the mother who had always been by his side. What he wanted now was what I had left in money and resources. He still didn't understand that my life, my choices, my quiet strength, were independent of any dollar amount. And Charlotte, and child thy own whelm, Hopstockhearties, with her pride and cold posture, had encouraged the rush to try to rescue something that would never be hers. I sat in the wooden chair by the window, looking at the trees, swaying gently in the breeze. I thought about how many years I spent being underestimated, being looked at sideways by those who thought that a simple woman alone could have no vision, no intelligence, no resources. And now, finally, the irony. Now, those who tried to control and humiliate me were faced with the evidence of my autonomy. But it was too late. The wound Matthew was trying to mend, Charlotte's attachment to a life of status and control, all of that couldn't alter what I had done. The feeling that invaded me was strangely light. A deep relief ran through my veins, as if I had finally breathed after decades of silent restraint. Silence, which was once acceptance, was now protection. Oh, I didn't block his number in anger. It wasn't revenge. It was the preservation of my peace. I no longer had to make myself emotionally available to those who didn't see my worth, to those who still believed that my presence was measured by what I could give in dollars, and not by the love and dedication that built the man Matthew had become. As I thought about it, I realized how different my life had become from the days when I accompanied him to school, afraid of every fall, every disappointment, every little difficulty. I had learned to choose my battles, to preserve my dignity, and, above all, to know that some people only value what they can take from you. And finally, why? Matthew and Charlotte had figured out exactly what that meant, and the discovery came too late. There was a moment when I almost felt sorry. Almost. But I didn't allow that emotion to take over. I knew that pity would not change anything, restore lost respect, or rebuild the honesty I had always expected from Matthew. The penalty would be a luxury that no longer served me. Instead, I kept calm. Took a deep breath and looked out the window, watching the city move by, Hantanogram. The cars passing slowly, the people going about their lives as if they were simple lines connecting beginning and end. My line, however, had strengthened and become unbreakable. With the decision made, I blocked Matthew's number. Noon. I clicked a button and felt the screen confirm the act with a sense of silent certainty. It was not a gesture of hatred. It was not revenge. It was relief. I protected my life, my peace, my dignity, and for the first time in a long time, I felt that the weight I had been carrying for years, of trying to please, of trying to be accepted, finally fell away. As the sun went down, tinting the sky with shades of orange and pink, I realized how powerful that action was. Matthew and Charlotte had been mistaken about my silence, about my simplicity, about my submission. They had underestimated the strength of a woman who had always planned and acted wisely. Revelation to them would not change my life, but it would certainly change their perception of it. And the best part, I didn't have to witness their humiliation. Silent justice had already fulfilled its role. I sat down. I sat. Finally, with my cup of tea in my hands, feeling the warmth run through my fingers and the soft aroma rise to my nose. For a moment, I was silent, reflecting on the irony of life. The more someone tries to control another person for money or status, the more vulnerable they become to their own arrogance. Matthew and Charlotte had proven it, without realizing it, and I knew that this lesson would follow them, even if they were slow to admit it. As I watched the movement outside, I couldn't help but think that true wealth was never financial. It was never measured in dollars or property. My wealth was in the serenity gained, in the independence preserved, in the love that would never condition Matthew's loyalty or obedience. He was finally beginning to understand that there were things that money could not buy, and perhaps someday, Charlotte would also realize that controlling someone else's life through status and pressures was a trap that only reveals inner fragility. And as the sky darkened, painting the streets with artificial lights and long shadows, I knew this was the turning point. Matthew and Charlotte had found out, but it was too late. What I had done was irreversible. My protection, my silence, my decision to channel the inheritance to those who would really need it. Everything had been completed. I felt a strange, silent joy, the feeling that every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every tear shed without a witness, had been transformed into a force that could finally not be challenged. And then, as I placed my cup on the table and looked at the city lights reflecting on the glass in my kitchen, I realized that the next step, the one that would truly mark the ultimate change, was about to happen. But the question that hovered in my mind, and that I knew also hovered over Matthew and Charlotte, was clear. Now that they had seen my strength and determination, how would they react when they discovered that a person's true wealth is never measured by what one possesses, but by what one chooses to preserve? The answer, now, I knew, was about to come. and nothing would ever be the same again. I left Austin on a clear Thursday morning, leaving behind the heat of the city and the troubles that insisted on following me, and headed toward Marble Falls, where my church friend, Helen Ningseo, generously offered me her lakeside getaway. The car followed quietly along the winding road, lined with trees and hills that were painted green and gold in the morning sunlight. I took a deep breath, feeling the fresh air penetrate my lungs. Why? And for the first time in a long time, a weight I had been carrying for years seemed to dissipate, if only a little. It wasn't an escape, I knew. It was recovery. It was the moment to meet again the woman who had existed before all the trials, before the humiliations, and before feeling the need to prove something to someone. I arrived at Helen's house, a charming wooden building, simple, but full of soul. The lake reflected the blue sky and the few clouds that floated lazily. I sat on the porch, feeling the wind blow on my face, listening to the singing of birds and the gentle rustling of leaves. A good silence, which didn't need to be filled, enveloped me. I'm the lost I took an old book I had brought with me, flipped through a few pages, and then put the book aside to just watch the water. There was a firm serenity, unlike anything I had ever felt. I felt no resentment, no euphoria, just the clear conscience of someone who faced storms and survived without making a fuss. In the following days, my routine was simple but profound. He walked along the shore of the lake, feeling the gravity of every step, absorbing every reflection of the light in the water, breathing the stillness. I cooked for myself, small homemade dishes that reminded me of the times when Matthew still lived with me, and I realized how simple food always brought me comfort. I read in a low voice, my thoughts traveling between old memories and recent reflections. Every page turned, every step taken on the trails around the lake was like a ritual of reconnection with myself, as if every gesture gave back a part of my soul that I had left forgotten in Austin. I often reflect on what I lost and what I gained in the process. I lost the illusion that being accepted by everyone would be possible, that Matthew would always stand up for me, and that Charlotte would someday see beyond what money and status could buy. But, paradoxically, that's all hostile. Peeling down. This loss brought freedom. I didn't lose a child. Not an lose a child. I lost an illusion. And sometimes that's liberation. I thought, looking out at the lake, seeing the reflection of clouds that moved slowly, unhurriedly. Life, I realized, is like this. Some illusions must be abandoned so that we can finally walk light, without unnecessary weights. I spent hours talking to Helen, telling her everything in detail, as if I were writing to myself, but with someone I could listen to without judgment. She listened, nodded, laughed, and sometimes sighed with me. There was no hurry. There was no need for defense or explanation. It is simply the truth being told. No, and it gave me a sense of purification. Every word spoken, Every report of silence, wow, contempt and small victory seemed to solidify something inside me. I no longer needed to prove anything to Matthew, to Charlotte, or to anyone else. What I needed was my own certainty, my own dignity preserved. On one of those walks by the lake, I thought about all the moments that led me there, nights of vigilance at the bedside of sick Matthew, days saving for a course, a trip, or even a small gift that might encourage him. Every silent choice I made to shape a man of integrity without relying on money. All these choices, hidden from the world and even from Matthew, now revealed themselves as invisible pillars of my strength. I understood that my whole life has been a preparation for this moment, the reunion with myself. The awareness that freedom is not granted by others, but conquered by us, step by step, sitting by the lake, watching the waters reflect the trees. I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Complete peace. Not that peace made of illusions or nods of approval, but the profound peace of those who recognize their own strength, their own value, and their own autonomy. I could feel the weight of the judgments fade, the tension I had carried since Charlotte's dinner dissipate. The woman who returned to Austin after those days would be different. Lighter, more whole, more complete. I felt whole not because I possessed wealth, but because I had rebuilt my essence, and nothing could take that away from me. During these hours of reflection, I thought of Matthew, Charlotte, and all that they had discovered too late. I realized that life is funny. Some learn by trial and error. Others only realize it when the chance to change something is gone. I had decided long ago that my financial and emotional decisions would be to preserve my peace, not to please or punish. What Charlotte and Matthew felt when they realized my quiet strength was a consequence of their own choices. They found out, but it was too late, and this realization brought immense freedom. The feeling that, even in the midst of pain, silent wisdom can be a powerful and transformative weapon. In the last few days in Marble Falls, I also noticed something that marked me deeply. The simplicity of life by the lake showed me that I never needed luxury to be happy. The singing of birds, the wind in the trees, the reflection of light in the water, that was wealth. Everything the world could measure in dollars, gold, or property did not compare to the fullness of simply existing in peace with myself. The Lorraine who returned to Austin would be this woman, complete, serene and protected by her own history and choices. And as the sun began to set, tinting the lake orange and pink, I understood that the real victory was not showing Matthew or Charlotte something, but the realization that my worth never needed to be confirmed by anyone. I went back inside myself. I went back to my essence. I returned to the freedom that only a life lived with dignity can offer. And as I breathed in the cool night air, I heard the wind among the trees as if whispering something I had never heard before. That always gives us the chance to rediscover our own strength, even when everyone around tries to diminish it. And at that moment, I smiled alone, knowing that, while From that moment on, nothing could take away from me what I had conquered. But one question lingered in my mind, clear and intense. When will Matthew finally understand that true wealth is not what we inherit, but who we become? When will Charlotte realize that trying to control and measure someone else's worth by money is an illusion that always fails? The answer, I knew. Only time would tell. Well, and I was finally at peace to watch from afar. Serene and whole, how I returned from Marble Falls with a firmer heart than ever, as if every bit of me had been sown with new care, and life, which once seemed so heavy to me, now fit entirely in my hands without flowing. Days later, one hot chocolate, in a silent, late afternoon, I opened my freezer to get water and came face to face with it. The walnut cake, the one I took to dinner, the same one that no one touched, the same one that symbolized everything I was that day. Invisible, out of place, diminished. It was there, wrapped in my mother's cloth, and intact, as if waiting for the right moment to be remembered. Oh, I took the wrapping out slowly, put a slice in the oven, and the sweet smell took over the kitchen. I sat on the porch with a black coffee, watching the wind move the trees, and there, town, in the middle of that great silence, everything became clear. I had been used as a contrast, as a symbol of poverty, as a decorative piece in someone else's show. But you know what they never realized? I was never ashamed of the life I led. I was a mother on the most difficult days. I was ground when the world wanted to bring me down. I was a shelter when the storm fell too hard. And now, as I felt the warm taste of the cake and the memory of my grandmother there with me, I understood who I really was. Not the ignored woman, not the poor mother, not the shadow. I was what was left of me, whole, lucid, calm, and secure. As for them, each one went his own way. Charlotte tried for some time to rebuild the control she thought she had over Matthew, but the wear and tear appeared quickly. Matthew, in turn, lived the weight of his own choices, not in a cruel way, but naturally, as life always demands with precision. After I blocked his number, he tried to talk to me through a third party, but was already too far from that emotional place. I didn't hate him. I didn't kick him out of my life, but I learned to love without demolishing myself. Today, if he comes to me, it is by letter, and sometimes I answer. Other times, I just pray, everything in its own time. The most important thing is that I found peace where before there was only pain. The great lesson I take from all this is simple, but profound. We don't lose people, we lose illusions. Sometimes God allows certain masks to fall so that we can clearly see who we have always been, even when the world has tried to convince us otherwise. Love continues to exist, but it matures, and when he matures, he stops begging and begins to choose what brings peace, what brings dignity, what brings truth. If you have stayed with me so far, I thank you with all my heart. Thank you for listening to my story as if sitting on the sidewalk with an old friend. Your like, for me, is like a tight hug, one of those that warms, that welcomes, that says, I'm here with you. Oh, and your registration is like an invitation to come back for another coffee. One of those where we talk looking into the eyes and let the soul rest a little. Tell me in the comments where you're watching me. I love to imagine this little piece of life crossing cities, states, houses, and coming to me like a breath of company. And it activates the bell. Wokai will not come. See? That way you don't lose when the coffee is brewed again, because there is always another chapter of life waiting to be told. And I still have a lot saved in my years. Don't go away yet. Listen to the next true story that will appear on the screen. Still way. Always remember, when you crawl, each wrinkle tells a story, and each story carries a strength. Watch the next video here on the channel with another incredible story.